I always believed that trust was the foundation of any marriage. Without it, what's left? A house, a couple of shared bills, maybe a few good memories, but nothing real, nothing lasting. And yet here I was, sitting alone in a half-empty house, questioning everything I thought I knew about my wife and our relationship. Her name is Lillian. We've been married for 8 years, and I thought we had a good thing going. Not perfect, no marriages, but solid. We had our share of disagreements, sure, but we always found a way back to each other. At least, that's what I believed. But tonight, she wasn't coming back to me. Not yet. She was at his party. Not just any friend's party. No, she had chosen to spend the night at her ex-boyfriend's place, celebrating his birthday, surrounded by people I barely knew. She didn't ask me to come. She didn't even try to pretend like I was invited. When I questioned her about it earlier in the day, she gave me a look, one I'd never seen from her before. It was almost defiant. "Oh, come on, Henry, stop being so dramatic. It's just a party. I used to date the guy years ago. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal." That's what she said as she stood in front of me, applying her lipstick, adjusting her dress. A dress I had never seen before. It was new, hugging her body in a way that made it clear she had put extra effort into looking good tonight. Not a big deal. That's what she said as she grabbed her clutch, checked her reflection one last time, and walked out the door without even kissing me goodbye. I sat there for hours, staring at my phone, waiting for a message, an update, anything. Nothing came. The silence felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Was I overreacting? Was I just being insecure? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she just wanted a fun night out. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe, but deep down, something felt off. A man knows when his wife is pulling away. And Lillian had been distant for a while now. It started subtly, late nights at work, vague answers when I asked where she had been, her phone always face down on the table. Little things that, on their own, meant nothing. But together? They formed a picture I didn't want to see. I thought about texting her, asking when she was coming home. But I stopped myself. She had made her choice. Now it was my turn to make mine. I stood up, walked to the closet, and pulled out an old cardboard box from the top shelf. It was dusty, sealed shut with tape that had started peeling at the edges. Inside were memories, things from before. Letters, photos, keepsakes from a time when Lillian and I were happy, when I didn't have to wonder where I stood in her life. I sat on the bed, flipping through them, feeling a dull ache in my chest. How did we get here? Somewhere along the way I had stopped being enough for her. And now she was out there at her ex's place, proving it to herself. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just spiting me, she was testing me. Seeing how far she could push before I finally broke. But what she didn't know was that I had already made my decision. She would come home eventually, expecting things to go back to normal. But she had no idea what was waiting for her. And when she walked through that door, the look on her face would be priceless. The night felt endless. I sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the clock on the wall. 1:12 a.m. She wasn't home. I should have gone to bed, should have forced myself to sleep. But how could I? How could any man rest easy knowing his wife was at her ex-boyfriend's house, drinking, laughing, doing God knows what? I leaned back, exhaling slowly. My mind was a storm of emotions, anger, confusion, humiliation. But beneath it all, there was a strange, unsettling sense of clarity. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This wasn't about a simple night out. This was about control. Lillian wanted to see how much she could get away with. She wanted to test my patience, to see if I would chase her, beg for her attention. She was expecting a fight. She wasn't going to get one. Instead, I got up and went to the closet, grabbing the suitcase I hadn't touched in years. It was an old leather bag, scuffed at the edges, but sturdy. The same one I had used when we moved in together. I carried it into the bedroom and placed it on the bed, my hands steady as I unzipped it. Piece by piece, I started packing. Not my things. Hers. Shirts, jeans, dresses. The perfume she always wore, the framed photos of us from happier days. I didn't throw anything, I folded everything neatly, carefully, as if it still meant something. Maybe I was being too calm about all of this. But the truth was I had already accepted it. Lillian wasn't my wife anymore. Not in the ways that mattered. As I packed, memories flooded my mind. The way she used to light up when I walked through the door. The way she used to call me just to hear my voice. The way she used to choose me until one day she didn't. And now she was out there, proving just how far she had drifted. The last thing I packed was the wedding album. I hesitated for a second, flipping through the pages. Our smiles looked forced now. The love in her eyes something I had imagined. I shut the album and placed it on top. Done. Now all that was left to do was wait. And so I did. Minutes turned into hours. 2:30 a.m. 3 a.m. Then, finally, the front door creaked open. I didn't move. I just sat there, hands folded, watching as Lillian stepped inside. Her hair was a mess, her makeup smudged. She reeked of alcohol and something else, something that made my stomach turn. She froze when she saw me. "Henry?" Her voice was uncertain, as if she hadn't expected me to still be awake. I didn't answer. I just gestured toward the suitcase. Her eyes flicked to the bed, then back to me. A slow, creeping realization dawned across her face. And for the first time in years, I saw it. Panic. She had spent all night trying to prove she could walk away from me. Now, she was realizing she might have actually lost me. Lillian just stood there, her fingers clutching the strap of her purse, her eyes darting between me and the suitcase sitting on our bed. The silence in the room stretched so long that I could hear the soft ticking of the clock in the hallway. She looked at me again, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something, but no words came. I didn't move, didn't blink. I wanted her to feel this moment, to let it sink in. A part of me expected her to launch into damage control mode, to start with the excuses, the justifications, the desperate attempt to smooth things over like nothing had happened. But instead, she just laughed. A dry, forced chuckle, like she was trying to convince herself that none of this was real. "Henry," she said, shaking her head as she tossed her purse onto the couch. "What is this?" I exhaled slowly. "Your things." Her smile faltered. "What do you mean?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. My voice was calm. Too calm. "I mean, you don't need to unpack. You already made your choice tonight, Lillian." She blinked at me, confusion flickering in her expression. Then, as if realizing what I was saying, her face twisted into annoyance. "Oh my God, Henry, are you seriously doing this right now? Over a party?" I let out a small, humorless laugh. "It wasn't just a party, and we both know it." She rolled her eyes, rubbing her temple like she was exasperated, like I was the unreasonable one. "I told you before I left it wasn't a big deal. We were just catching up. I have nothing to hide." I stood up, walking past her into the kitchen. I needed distance, needed air, because if I stood there any longer, I was afraid of what I might say. Behind me, I heard her following. "Henry," she sighed. "Come on. I had a few drinks, we talked, and I came home. That's it. You're acting like I cheated on you or something." I turned to face her. "Should I check your phone and see if that's true?" Her jaw tightened, and there it was, the flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Not anger, fear. She folded her arms over her chest. "I can't believe you don't trust me." "Then unlock your phone and show me." Silence. That was all I needed to know. I shook my head, stepping back. "I see. So, you expect me to sit here like an idiot, except that you spent the night at your ex's place, and not even question it?" "It wasn't at his place," she snapped. "It was at his friend's house. And I wasn't the only one there, Henry. There were a bunch of people. God, you always blow things out of proportion." "I blow things out of proportion?" I repeated, my voice lower now. "Steady. Lillian, let's be real. You weren't just some guest at that party. You didn't just catch up." She scoffed, shaking her head. "You have no proof of anything." I let out a slow breath. "You're right. I don't." Her body relaxed slightly, thinking she had one. But then I added, "But I have enough." She frowned. "What does that mean?" I turned, walked to the counter, and picked up my phone. I tapped a few buttons, then turned the screen toward her. It was a photo. The same photo I had received earlier that night. Her, sitting on the couch. His arm around her, his hand resting on her thigh. Her face drained of color. She looked up at me, eyes wide. "Where did you get that? Does it matter?" I asked, tilting my head. "I told you, Lillian. I don't need proof. But I have enough." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. And in that moment I saw the shift. The exact second she realized she had lost control of the situation. She had spent all night trying to push me to the edge, waiting for me to react, to chase, to beg. But now she was the one scrambling. You don't understand, she tried, stepping closer. That was nothing. He was just joking around. It wasn't serious, I swear. I didn't answer. I just pointed at the suitcase. She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. So what? You're kicking me out? Just like that? Over a damn photo. I met her gaze, unwavering. No, Lillian. I'm letting you go. For the first time, she looked truly afraid. Like she hadn't expected this to backfire. She thought she was the one in control. She thought she had all the power. But now, she was standing in front of me, watching as the world she thought she had built was crumbling beneath her feet. You're not serious, she whispered. I didn't respond. I just stepped aside, clearing the path to the door. Take your time, I said quietly. But you don't live here anymore. She stared at me, her breathing shallow. And for the first time since she walked through that door, she realized this wasn't a game. She had pushed too far. And now there was no going back. Lillian just stood there, frozen in place, staring at me like I had spoken in a language she didn't understand. The weight of my words was settling over her, pressing down like a lead blanket. The smugness, the defiance, the arrogance she had walked in with, it was all gone now, replaced by something else. Doubt, fear, realization. I didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. You're serious? Her voice was quiet now, almost fragile. I nodded. She let out a breathless laugh, shaking her head. Henry, come on. You're blowing this out of proportion. We had a fight. I went to a party, and now you're throwing me out of my own house. I clenched my jaw. Our house, I corrected. And no, Lillian, I'm not throwing you out. You left. You made your choice when you walked out that door tonight. And now I'm making mine. Her lips parted, but she didn't have a response. She wasn't prepared for this. She had walked into this house expecting drama. A screaming match. Maybe even some pathetic pleading from me. A desperate attempt to pull her back in. She was expecting me to react emotionally, to break. But what she got instead was silence. And silence? It's louder than anything. Lillian swallowed hard, her fingers twitching at her sides. She took a slow step forward, her voice softer now. Henry, please, can we just talk? I raised an eyebrow. Now you want to talk? She flinched. I let out a small, humorless chuckle and rubbed a hand over my face. You ignored me all night, didn't answer my texts, didn't call. And now, when you walk in and see that I'm not waiting around like a fool, suddenly you want to talk? Her throat bobbed as she swallowed again. Did he kiss you? I cut her off. Her eyes snapped up to mine, wide with shock. What? Did he kiss you? I repeated, my voice calm, even. She hesitated. And that was everything. I exhaled, nodding to myself. That's what I thought. Lillian's eyes darted away, like she could physically avoid the truth if she just didn't meet my gaze. It wasn't, she started, but I held up a hand. Don't. She stopped mid-sentence. I don't need to hear it, I continued. I don't need excuses or half-truths, or whatever story you're about to spin to make yourself feel better. I just needed to see your reaction. And that's enough for me. She clenched her fists. Henry, it didn't mean anything. Then why didn't you tell me before you left? I shot back. Her breath hitched. Silence. Again. I shook my head, stepping back. Lillian, if it really didn't mean anything, you would have told me about it. Before I had to see a damn photo to know what was happening. She looked down, biting her lip. I could see her mind racing, scrambling for something, anything, that would get her out of this. Lillian, I said softly, I loved you. Her head snapped up. Loved? I gave her a sad smile. Yeah, loved. Something cracked in her expression. Her breathing was unsteady now, her hands trembling. She knew. She knew I had checked out. I gestured to the suitcase again. I won't make this ugly, but I'm done. You can stay with a friend. Hell, maybe stay with him. Seems fitting, don't you think? Her face crumbled. Henry, please. I shook my head. No, Lillian. You don't get to beg now. She reached for me, but I stepped back before she could touch me. And the look in her eyes? It was pure devastation, because she finally truly understood. She had spent the night playing games, and now she had lost everything. Lillian's breathing was shallow, her fingers trembling as she looked between me and the suitcase. I could see her brain trying to process everything, trying to find a way to undo the damage. But some things can't be undone. She took a deep breath, as if steadying herself, then shook her head. Henry, don't do this. Please. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking clearly. I let out a humorless laugh. So now it's the alcohol's fault? Her lips pressed together, frustration flickering across her face. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I wasn't in the right state of mind. I let things go too far, okay? But it didn't mean anything. I raised an eyebrow. Then why did you hide it from me? If it was so innocent, why didn't you answer my texts? Why did I have to find out through a photo instead of my own wife? She had no answer to that. Instead, she ran a shaky hand through her hair and let out a breath. Henry, I swear, I never meant to hurt you. You didn't mean to get caught, I corrected. Her eyes widened slightly like she hadn't expected me to be so blunt. I folded my arms over my chest, keeping my voice even. Tell me something, Lillian. If I hadn't gotten that photo, would you have told me? Her mouth opened, then shut. And that silence? It told me everything I needed to know. She wouldn't have told me. She would have come home, smiled at me, maybe even kissed me goodnight, and I would have never known that while I was sitting here alone, my wife was letting another man put his hands on her. I clenched my jaw, turning away before I said something I'd regret. This was the woman I had spent years building a life with. The woman I had trusted, loved, fought for. And now, as I stood here watching her squirm under the weight of her own actions, I realized something. I didn't recognize her anymore. I ran a hand over my face, exhaling slowly. You know what hurts the most, Lillian? She swallowed hard. What? It's not even the photo. It's not even the fact that you went to his party and let him touch you. Her face paled. It's the fact that you don't even seem sorry. She flinched like I had slapped her. Henry, I am sorry. No, I said, shaking my head. You're sorry that I found out. You're sorry that now you have to deal with the consequences. But if you really, truly felt bad about what you did, you wouldn't have done it in the first place. Her eyes were glassy now, like she was on the verge of crying. I should have felt something, sympathy, regret, anything. But I didn't. Because I was done. I gestured toward the suitcase again. Take it and go, Lillian. She let out a shaky breath, then slowly walked over to the bed. For a second, I thought she was going to grab the suitcase. Instead, she sank onto the mattress, burying her face in her hands. I frowned. What are you doing? She let out a choked laugh, shaking her head. This is insane, Henry. You can't just throw away 8 years like this. You can't just pack my stuff and tell me to leave like I'm some stranger. I scoffed. You made yourself a stranger the moment you chose to humiliate me. She blinked up at me, stunned. But I wasn't finished. You could have gone anywhere last night. You could have called, texted, anything. But instead, you chose to ignore me to spend the night with a man you know still wants you. And now you expect me to just sit here and pretend it's fine. I shook my head. I deserve better than this. Better than you. Her breath hitched. And there it was. The moment it really, truly hit her. I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't throwing some childish tantrum. I was done. She wiped at her eyes, her voice small now. Where am I supposed to go? I let out a sharp breath. You should have thought about that before you spent the night disrespecting our marriage. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Because what could she say? I had spent years putting her first. Yeah? I was finally choosing myself. She let out a slow, shaky breath, then finally reached for the suitcase. She stood there for a moment, gripping the handle, staring at the floor like she was still waiting for me to stop her. But I didn't. I just opened the door and stepped aside. Her eyes met mine one last time, searching. But whatever she was looking for, it was already gone. And with that, she walked out of my life. The door clicked shut behind her. For the first time in 8 years, I was alone in this house, not just physically, but in a way that felt deeper, more final. The silence stretched, thick and heavy like the air after a storm. I stood there, gripping the doorknob, listening to her hesitant footsteps on the porch. For a second, I thought she might turn back, knock, try one last time to get me to change my mind. But she didn't. Instead, I heard the sound of a car door opening, then closing. The engine hummed to life. And then, just like that, she was gone. I exhaled slowly, my hands tightening into fists before I forced them to relax. My mind should have been racing, drowning in emotions, anger, grief, regret, but all I felt was empty. Numb. I turned back to the house, my eyes scanning the living room. Everything looked the same. The same couch, the same framed wedding photos on the wall, the same flickering glow of the lamp we'd picked out together years ago. But it wasn't the same. Because the woman I had built this life with wasn't mine anymore. I walked over to the couch and sat down heavily, leaning forward, pressing my hands against my face. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me, but I didn't crumble under it. Because deep down I had seen this coming. Maybe not this exact moment, not this exact way, but I had felt her pulling away for months. The late nights at work, the unexplained phone calls, the way she'd glance at me like she was bored, like I was nothing more than a familiar presence in the background of her life. And still, I had tried. Tried to be patient, to be understanding, to believe that if I just gave her time, she'd come back to me. But she hadn't. And last night? Last night was the final straw. I wasn't the kind of man who needed to go through her phone or beg for reassurance. I had never been that insecure. But the second she hesitated when I asked her if she kissed him, that was the moment I knew I wasn't losing her. I had already lost her. I leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. My wedding ring felt heavier on my finger than it ever had before. 8 years. 8 years of memories, of laughter, of plans for the future. And now I had to ask myself, had any of it been real? Had she ever really loved me, or had I just been convenient? I closed my eyes, exhaustion creeping in. I hadn't slept all night, and now that the adrenaline had faded, I could feel the weight of it settling in my bones. But I knew if I went to bed now, I wouldn't sleep. Because my mind would keep replaying everything. So instead, I stood up and walked over to the bookshelf. My eyes landed on a framed photo of us, our wedding day. Lillian's arms were wrapped around my neck, her head tilted back in laughter, her eyes bright with joy. I stared at it for a long moment. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, I took the frame and turned it face down. I wasn't ready to throw it away. Not yet. But I also couldn't look at it. Not now. I stepped away, running a hand through my hair. There was still so much to process, so much to undo. I had spent years building my life around Lillian, around the idea of us. Now, I had to figure out what my life looked like without her. I walked back into the bedroom, my eyes landing on the neatly packed suitcase she had taken with her. But there was still so much of her left behind, her clothes in the closet, her perfume on the dresser, her books stacked next to the bed. It hit me then. She hadn't really believed I'd go through with it. She thought I was just angry, that this was just another fight, that she could come back tomorrow, apologize, and things would go back to the way they were. But I wasn't angry. I was done. I grabbed my phone and opened our messages. My last text to her was still sitting there, unread. I didn't text her again. Instead, I scrolled through our photos, years of captured moments flashing before me. Vacations, holidays, lazy Sundays on the couch. It felt like I was looking at someone else's life. I exhaled, then did something I never thought I'd do. I started deleting them. One by one. Because the man in those photos, the man who believed in forever, who believed that love was enough to keep someone by your side, he didn't exist anymore. I don't remember falling asleep, but when I opened my eyes, the room was bathed in the dim light of early morning. For a few disoriented seconds, I forgot. I forgot that my wife was gone. I forgot that my marriage had collapsed overnight. I forgot that everything I had spent years building had unraveled in the span of a single conversation. Then it all came rushing back. I sat up, rubbing a hand over my face. The house was eerily silent, too silent. Normally, Lillian would already be up by now, sipping her coffee, scrolling through her phone, humming a song she had stuck in her head. But there was no coffee brewing. No sound of her moving through the house. No scent of her perfume lingering in the air. Because she was gone. And she wasn't coming back. I exhaled slowly, my chest tight. I had wanted this. I had been the one to tell her to leave. But the reality of it? The weight of it? It was heavier than I had expected. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up, stretching the stiffness from my limbs. The suitcase was gone, but her presence still lingered in the clothes hanging in the closet, the jewelry left on the nightstand, the shoes by the door. I needed to fix that. I wasn't going to sit here, surrounded by reminders of a woman who had already made her choice. So I got to work. I grabbed an empty box from the closet and started packing. Her sweaters. Her dresses. The framed photos of us from vacations and anniversaries. Every single trace of her. At first, it hurt. Every item I picked up felt like a fresh wound, a reminder of what we had once been. But the longer I packed, the more freeing it felt. By the time I was done, there were 3 boxes stacked by the door. I didn't know where she had gone, and I didn't care. She could come pick them up whenever she wanted. Or not. It wasn't my problem anymore. I grabbed my phone and checked the notifications. A few missed calls from a number I recognized, one of her friends. I ignored it. Instead, I opened my text messages and typed out a single message to Lillian. Your things are packed. Let me know when you're coming to get them. I stared at the screen for a moment before hitting send. Less than a minute later, the 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Then, finally, her reply. Henry, can we just talk? I let out a humorless chuckle. Now she wanted to talk. Now that she was sitting in some unfamiliar place, realizing that her plan to push me, to test me, had backfired completely. I hovered over the keyboard, debating what to say. Then I typed 2 words. There's nothing left. I hit send and tossed my phone onto the couch. Because it was the truth. There was nothing left to save. Nothing left to fix. Nothing left to hold on to. And for the first time in a long, long time. That felt okay. The days that followed felt strangely quiet, but not in the way I had feared. At first, I thought I would crumble under the weight of it all. That I would wake up in the middle of the night, expecting to hear Lillian breathing beside me only to be hit with the harsh reality that she was gone. But that didn't happen. Instead, something unexpected took its place: relief. I had spent so long fighting for something that was already gone. Trying to hold on to a person who had checked out long before I realized it. And now that I had finally let go, it felt like I could breathe again. Lillian eventually texted me asking if she could come pick up her things. I told her I'd leave them outside on the porch. I didn't want another conversation. There was nothing left to say. When I heard the sound of her car pulling up later that evening, I didn't even look out the window. I just sat on the couch, flipping through channels, waiting for her to be gone. And when I finally heard her drive away, it was over. Truly, finally over. I spent the next few weeks focusing on myself. I had spent so much time revolving my life around my marriage that I had forgotten who I was outside of it. So I started rediscovering myself. I went back to the gym, something I had neglected for years. I started reading again, finishing books I had abandoned on my nightstand. I picked up an old hobby, photography, and took my camera out for the first time in ages, capturing sunsets, city lights, moments that had nothing to do with my past and everything to do with my future. And slowly, day by day, I started feeling like myself again. One evening, I was sitting at my favorite coffee shop, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a voice behind me. Henry. I turned and saw Madeline, an old friend I hadn't seen in years. We had gone to college together, lost touch after graduation. She looked different, but in a good way. Brighter. Happier. We caught up over coffee, laughing about old memories, talking about where life had taken us. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about Lillian. I wasn't thinking about the past. I was just here, in the present, enjoying the company of someone who actually cared to listen. As we said goodbye that night, she smiled at me. It's good seeing you again. Let's not wait another 10 years before catching up. I smiled back. I'd like that. And as I walked back to my car, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my story. Lillian was just a chapter, one that had come to its natural conclusion. And now? Now it was time for me to start a new one. A better one. A happier one.